Welcome back to the Comeback Kid, everybody. When we last left you, we were recapping the World Series, and now, NHL, Matt, hockey season, it's underway, and I would say it's fair to say that at this point in the season, we're starting to see some noticeable trends so far, like what teams are going to be surprises, what teams have really just started slow, and some notable standout players have really emerged this season, and the storyline that has stuck out to me the most has been the Las Vegas Golden Knights, who have started 8-1 on the year. They got off to an 8-1 start and are first in the most recent NHL power rankings on NHL.com. And if you're unfamiliar with who the Las Vegas Golden Knights are, just a brief recap, they are an expansion team who have played their very first professional games not even 2 months ago. They are brand new to the NHL. They are an expansion team, and they are already 8-1 to start the year. This has been such an interesting story, not just as a hockey standpoint, but just a huge sports story in how the expansion draft has set up teams and how they can, like, is it fair for them to succeed as much as they are doing right now? So, Matt, my question for you is, what has been going right for the Las Vegas Golden Knights? How have they been able to prove everyone wrong?
So that's a great question, Ben. Every NHL team needs two good things: scoring and defense. You don't win games without scoring goals. You don't win games allowing a ton of goals. So those are what it comes down to. So scoring, I have to go with the resurgence of James Neal. James Neal is a former 40-goal scorer for the Pittsburgh Penguins, the two-time defending Pittsburgh Penguins. He wasn't part of those teams. He was on Nashville, so he lost to the Penguins. He's a top 6 option for the Nashville Predators, and he kind of stepped into that same role for Vegas. He was left unprotected during the expansion draft. We'll get more to like what that means in a minute or so. In that move, when you're giving up a top forward like that, is probably more of a salary shed move by Nashville. They had a lot of contracts coming up that they wanted to make room for. But yeah, James Neal this year is tied for 4th in goals scored and was a waiver pickup by yours truly in our fantasy league.
And who lost this week in our fantasy league? Who came out on top and who lost this week?
It don't matter.
Astros in 6.
Astros in 6. But yeah, that's a soft spot. I'm probably one of 2 people in our fantasy hockey league that knows hockey, and I'm just getting railed. And it's not like I'm not trying. I have no answers. My proudest moments in this league are picking up James Neal off waivers and getting Ben to pick up Nikita Kucherov.
Yes, that was. He wasn't necessarily a pickup. He was like the 3rd overall pick in our draft, and he's been the number 1 fantasy hockey option. But let's get back to the Las Vegas Golden Knights, Matt. So what have you seen from them that has been so impressive?
So outside of their scoring, I would have to go with their defense as well. The story says a lot when you've allowed the fewest goals in the NHL. So what that comes down to is good defense, but also just a surprise from their goaltending. So far in the year, they've used 3 different goalies in like 10 games into the season, and it hasn't really mattered who's in net as far as the season's been going so far. So I think probably one of the most exciting names coming over to Vegas out of the expansion draft was Marc-Andre Fleury, the starting goalie for the Pittsburgh Penguins, who's a 3-time Stanley Cup champion. He, in a very classy move, waived his no-movement clause so that the Pittsburgh Penguins could protect their much younger goalie, Matt Murray, who's Rookie of the Year last year. So he left. He was drafted by the Vegas Golden Knights 14 years to the day from when he was drafted by the Pittsburgh Penguins back in 2003. So I think he was, probably carrying a lot of the weight of the team going into this season, and he really needed to have a good year for this team to contend, or so I thought. He's been out with concussion issues, which has always been a problem throughout his career. Then they went to waiver pickup Malcolm Subban, a former top prospect out of the Boston Bruins organization, to step up and play some of those games to carry some of the load. And he was amazing. his most notable game came against St. Louis when they won in overtime. He stopped 37 of 38 shots, which is just incredible. And we haven't had any reason to expect anything less of him so far. He goes down with injury-related problems as well. So now you're working on your third string goalie. That means the third goalie in your system. Oscar Donsk, another young goalie who was drafted. In his second game ever, he gets a shutout. And not even just a 1-0 shutout. Vegas went to Colorado and beat them 7-0. I think that's been another story early on in the NHL is how much scoring we're seeing so far. But we'll get back to that later. So Oscar Donsk is now their starting goalie, and he wasn't even expected to play this year. He was expected to play for the Chicago Wolves in their minor league system. So I would say if they're second in the league in goals against per game and they've allowed the fewest amount of goals, you're doing something right.
Well said, Matt. And what's truly amazing to me is how this is their very first year, and they're already leading the entire NHL in some of these categories. They're already some of the, one of the top teams in preventing goal scoring and offensively, and they, in many ways, kind of just picked up the remaining scraps from a lot of the teams around the league, and did so very effectively to the point where they've just built a perennial contender almost. Like it's fair to say that Las Vegas is possibly good enough to win the Stanley Cup this year, which is incredible. I don't think we've ever seen in any other sport an expansion team first year in the league contending for, albeit a World Series or an NBA Finals title or a Super Bowl. We've never seen it. And in hockey, we could see it this year with the Las Vegas Golden Knights. And that this poses the question of whether or not this is a problem, because should we, because there's a delicate balance when you're in any sport when you're trying to expand your league. You want to, I believe the goal is to make teams that aren't going to lose all 82 games in respect to hockey, or all 162 games in baseball. You want them to win some games, so you actually want to have a little bit of quality on their team so they don't just get completely run out. However, you usually want to make these teams too good, because it's almost as though you're giving them players and just immediately giving them the opportunity to win when other organizations have been around for 10, 20, 30, 40 years and still don't have a Stanley Cup, or haven't won a Stanley Cup in 20 to 30 years. And so, Matt, this poses the question that, is there an issue with the expansion draft if Vegas's early success is a sign of immediately contending year in and year out?
I think the answer is no. The expansion draft is designed to make the Golden Knights good, but not too good. So I think it would be appropriate if I gave a little bit of a background on how the expansion draft works, because then that might make my answer seem a little more reasonable. So in expansion draft years, existing teams submit a list of players they're going to protect from the draft, in a sense making them exempt, so protecting their players. They can go one of two routes. They can protect 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goalie, or protect 8 skaters, forward or defenseman, and 1 goalie. So most teams go the first route, but teams such as like Anaheim or Nashville, who are much stronger on defense and have a lot of depth, they're going to want to protect their defensemen, even at the cost of protecting less players. So also, any first or second year players are automatically exempt. But the bad part of it is that any players with a no movement clause must be protected. So they eat up one of those slots right away. So for instance, the Ducks, Corey Perry, Ryan Getzlaf, Ryan Kessler, and Kevin Bieksa all had no movement clauses, so they had to be protected, which adds a little bit of complication to the draft itself. So what these rules mean is that Vegas couldn't just poach the best player off of every team, which makes their success, I think, all the more impressive. I mean, they're not playing with Sidney Crosby as their center, Alex Ovechkin as their left wing, and dare I say, Nikita Kucherov as their right wing. That wouldn't happen. So I think what players such as James Neal and Marc-Andre Fleury being injured, are unique cases in which Neal was left exposed in the draft. so that Nashville could keep their defensive unit intact and probably shed a little salary. And then Fleury was arguably surpassed by their backup goalie Matt Murray, the then 22-year-old. So Fleury being 10 years older, they're gonna go with a younger goalie. So neither of these players were taking crucial roles in their current team's future plans, which I think is what led to them being exposed. But other than that, there weren't any high-profile names exposed because teams were making side deals with the Vegas Golden Knights so that they would pass up on certain players in exchange for future prospects, future draft picks. So going into this draft, I think Vegas had this mentality that they were setting themselves up for the future. So they had 3 first-round picks, which is crazy. The last time I can think of a team having that was the Boston Bruins in 2015. Before that, I'm not even sure when. So 3 first-round picks, I think 11 picks total in the draft. They got some nice prospects just from overlooking certain players. Like, for instance, the Ducks, with their no-movement contract blunder, they gave up defenseman Shea Theodore in the draft, a 21-year-old, so that Vegas would select Clayton Stoner instead of Sami Vatanen or Josh Manson, defensemen that are more highly valued than Clayton Stoner, to say the least. And I think Minnesota also kind of gave the same deal, which led to the Vegas Golden Knights getting Alex Tuch, or Tuch, I don't even know, I'll have to look that up, who has had an immediate impact with Vegas. So I think what this means is that a lot of their early success can't be explained on paper. Sure, they lead the league in fewest goals allowed while using their third-string goalie. So their third-string goalie. 3 goalies in 9 games. Put that into perspective. The Ducks have played 10 games, and Gibson has started 9 of them. So 3 goalies in 9 games. But you can't discredit all of the adversity and obstacles that the team and its city are currently going through. Vegas Strong, that's been a big part of the headlines early on. I think a lot of the teams are kind of respecting the first game that Vegas comes to their town to take a moment to remember what happened that fateful night. So this team really has a chance to establish itself in Las Vegas hearts so early in its existence, and a lot of that is from really rallying around a successful team. I think the outside circumstances would mean that Vegas would already be in the hearts, but certainly helps that they're going to be a contending team this year.
That's very well said, Matt. And you actually somewhat saw this coming. I remember before we even started this podcast, before we started playing fantasy hockey, you told me the Las Vegas Golden Knights are going to be a lot better than people think. People are just writing them off just because they're an expansion team. However, they have some quality names like Marc-Andre Fleury and James Neal who have really has something to prove. And I think you're right. What you said about Las Vegas and the atrocities that have happened in that city have really given each game for the Las Vegas Golden Knights, like each game there's been even more to play for. And they're not just playing for themselves, they're playing to rebuild the morale of a city, the confidence of a city that historically is a very confident city. And it's been such a cool story for Las Vegas's very first professional sports franchise to just come out of the gates in this way. It's been fun to watch. So 2017-2018 Stanley Cup champion Las Vegas Golden Knights in the future, Matt? Are you thinking that's legitimately a possibility?
Well, I think it's legitimately a possibility. But keep in mind, I'm going to still sound a little doubtful because we're only 9 games into the season. But I think with every game that goes by that Vegas wins, a little of that doubt is removed. I think they've definitely set themselves up to contend. What I've said, after the draft, is that any team that's going to have that kind of a draft can compete right away. I don't know if that means... I didn't even know at that point if that meant, like, hey, they're going to be in the playoffs, or like maybe they'll be like a 9th or 10th team in the Western Conference, which is known to be brutal and physically demanding. I think a lot of that comes from the new salary cap rules that were developed in the 2005 lockout. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of players are younger, they're faster, so teams going to have to give, like teams like Nashville or Pittsburgh are giving up proven veterans, but a lot of other teams are giving up much younger players that they were kind of bummed that they didn't get to develop with their team, but like maybe they were being ousted by bigger names. But I think that Vegas is young, they're fast, and they're strong, and I think that's what they need to succeed in the Western Conference. And who knows, maybe they will be hoisting the cup come June.
That would be, what a story that would be, right? So great stuff, Matt. So for those of you who are not hockey fans, how interesting is that, though, that the Las Vegas Golden Knights are able to come out to this strong of a start and just basically change the entire dynamic of the NHL. Great stuff, Matt. So when we come back, Nate, you have some choice words for the Houston Texans owner. He had some very controversial comments over the weekend. We will discuss those, as well as recent soccer news, both Europe and at home. That's right, Nate, it's coming, MLS. Please don't turn off USD Radio. I promise it's going to be entertaining. We'll be right back, guys.
7:30 on the